Back when I was in high school, I used to babysit at weekends to earn some extra money. One Friday, I was meant to be babysitting for my regulars, the McCullers, but due to having a sickness bug, they canceled that morning. However, Mrs. McCullough told me her friends, the Andrews, needed a babysitter and gave me their number. I rang Mrs. Andrews and mentioned how I had heard she was after a babysitter. She told me they had an important formal event to attend. She sounded desperate and offered to pay me double. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have agreed to do this without meeting the family first, but they came recommended, and I have to admit that double money did sound appealing. My sister dropped me off there at 6 p.m. It was a nice house, neatly mowed grass, rose trellises, a picket fence, the kind. Nothing about the place looked off. I knocked on the door, and this friendly man dressed in a suit answered. He showed me inside and pointed out where things were. I did notice the interior was quite old-fashioned with floral armchairs and trinkets and ornaments, but I didn't think much of this. He told me to help myself to anything out of the kitchen. Then he led me into the living room and introduced me to his 6-year-old daughter, Clara, who was watching cartoons and clutching this pink pony plushie. She asked me if I liked ponies, and she seemed happy about this when I told her I loved them. I followed the dad into the hallway, and that's when I saw his wife coming down the stairs in this purple gown. She was rubbing her arm, and that's when I saw this red scratch on it, swollen as if it had only just been done. She was polite, and told me that Clara could stay up until 7:30 p.m., and they'd be back at midnight. As she went to say goodbye to her daughter, the dad's whole demeanor changed. Then he leaned in closer to me and in this serious tone said, "Stay down here. Don't ever go upstairs." The way he spoke made me nervous, so I laughed. He gave me the sternest look and gripped my arm. "I mean it. Stay down here at all times. You must not go upstairs." I was too stunned to speak, so I just gave this awkward nod. Thinking about it now, I should have questioned this more. Being banned from the upstairs of the house you're babysitting for without so much as a reason is a massive red flag. On hearing footsteps, his smile returned and he let go of my arm. As he headed for the door, the mom spoke to me. "Thank you again for doing this, but please, for your own sake, don't go upstairs." I saw something in her eyes. I don't know. Thinking back, maybe it was fear. But before I could ask her what she meant by this, she left. I tried not to think too much about it and went and watched cartoons with Clara. When her cartoon finished, she asked me if I'd like to see her unicorn plushie, and I said I would. A good 10 minutes passed by, and she still hadn't returned. I gave it a few more minutes, then looked around the downstairs of the house for her, but couldn't find her anywhere. Then I heard footsteps coming from the floor above me. This meant that Clara must have been upstairs. Not knowing what else to do, I went to the bottom of the stairs and shouted her name. When I didn't get a reply, I started to panic, thinking she was badly hurt or something. Would her parents really want me to leave her up there injured just because of some stupid rule? I guess in that moment I realized just how absurd this whole thing was, so I clutched the banister and took the first step. I saw a flicker of something along the corridor, so I shouted Clara's name again. There was a scurry of footsteps along the upstairs hall, but from where I was, I couldn't make them out properly. I was about to take another step when I heard this laugh. It was creepy and sounded too low to be a child's, but I told myself it had to be Clara's. Before I could take another step, I heard a voice behind me asking what was I doing. I turned around to see Clara standing there holding a unicorn plushie. I swear, there's no way that girl could have gotten past me. Not when I've been there the whole time, but I definitely heard something upstairs. I asked her if there was someone else in the house, and she ignored my question and just started humming this strange tune to herself. Then I asked her if she'd been upstairs, and she shook her head, and a serious voice said, "I'm not allowed to go up there. You aren't allowed to either." I asked her where she'd been hiding downstairs, but she just started humming that strange tune again. The whole thing was freaking me out, and I started to wonder if it was just the floorboards or something, but I still couldn't explain that creepy laugh. At this point, I felt unsettled here, so I tried calling the number I had for the mom, but it went straight to voicemail. Not knowing what else to do, I stayed in the living room with Clara and let her watch more cartoons. When Clara's bedtime arrived, no kidding, she curled up on the living room couch and pulled a blanket over herself. When I asked her if she had a proper bed, she just told me that this was her proper bed. I couldn't watch TV when she was trying to sleep in there, so I went in the kitchen. I was just sitting there drinking a glass of milk, pretty much the only drink I could find in the basically bare fridge, when I heard something coming from the ceiling. Scurried footsteps, as if someone was running around up there. I went and checked on Clara, who was fast asleep on the couch. Then I went back into the kitchen, and the scurrying sounds continued. No animal could have caused these sounds. They were the sounds made by a person. I thought about going up there to investigate, but then this music started. It was scratchy sounding, as if it was playing on an old record player. It took me a few minutes to figure out where I recognized that music from, but then it clicked. It was the same weird tune Clara had been humming. That's it. I knew we definitely weren't alone in there. So I scooped her up in the blanket, left the house, locked the door, and sat on the doorstep and waited for her parents to get back. True to their word, they arrived back exactly at midnight. I explained what had happened, but neither of them seemed alarmed. The mom took a sleeping Clara in her arms while the dad went inside without any hesitation. I said something about calling the cops, but she shoved some money into my hand and wished me a good night. I didn't understand how she could be so calm, so I again said that there was a stranger in her house and she should really call the cops. Her lips curled into an unnerving smile, and she laughed out, "There is no stranger." Then, before I had time to think of a reply, she carried her daughter inside and closed the door on me. I started walking as quickly as I could, desperate to get away from that freaky situation. Then I rang my sister and begged her to come get me. When I told her what had happened, she seemed freaked out and told me I was crazy for not calling the cops. A week later, Mrs. McCullough called me up about babysitting. I told her I was taking a break from it and explained why. She was silent, then eventually told me that this wasn't right, as the Andrews told her I never called them. I checked the number with her, and turns out I had a digit wrong. This meant that whoever I babysat for that night wasn't the Andrews family. My sister told me I needed to tell the cops about this, and for that little girl's sake. They sent an officer around to the house to speak to them, but turns out an elderly couple lived there, and during the date I babysat, they'd been out of town for the weekend. No one should have been in that house. I guess I'll never know what was going on there, or why they agreed to let me babysit in the first place. I often think about who it was upstairs, and what would have happened to me if I had gone up there. I don't know. I'll never know, but the one thing I do know is that whoever that imposter family was, they weren't the Andrews, and that wasn't their house. When I was away at college, my friend suggested I sign up with the same babysitting agency as her. It seemed like an easy job, and the money wasn't bad, so I joined up. The first 2 jobs went smoothly, but then one night, the agency called me up and said they had a job for me that night. It was a Monday night, and I had nothing else on, so I agreed. I showed up at the apartment block at 8 p.m. and spoke on the intercom. I heard breathing sounds, but no one replied. They just buzzed me into the building. I thought they were probably just in a rush to get ready, so didn't think much of this. I knocked on the door, and this 9-year-old boy wearing superhuman pajamas let me in. He seemed quite shy, but once I told him I liked superheroes too, he seemed to relax and started going on and on about his favorite Marvel movies. I followed him into the kitchen, expecting his mom to be in there. That's when I heard the front door slam shut. I asked the boy where his mom was, and he said she just left and would be back later. Seriously? What parent just vanishes without even introducing themselves to the sitter minding their child? I checked everywhere, including the mom's room, which had what looked like the entire closet's worth of clothes piled on the bed. I found this pretty strange. I had her cell number on the info the agency had sent me, so I tried calling, but she didn't answer. I knew I couldn't just leave this kid alone, but I felt uneasy staying there after his mom just left like that. Something just didn't feel right about any of this. I played video games with the kid for a bit. Eventually, he went to bed, and I went and poured myself a drink of water. Then I watched TV and waited for this kid's mom to return. At about 11:30 a.m., I heard sounds coming from the hallway, so I muted the TV to listen. The footsteps stopped outside this apartment. Then I heard the rattling of keys. I gathered my stuff, my phone and bag, put my coat on, and stood up ready to leave pretty much as soon as they acknowledged me. I heard the door open, followed by footsteps, and then nothing. I checked the hallway, kitchen, and bathroom, but they were empty. Someone had definitely entered the apartment. There was even a pair of boots by the front door that hadn't been there before. There were only two rooms this person could be in, the kids' room or the mom's bedroom. I looked at the kids' room first. The door was already ajar. As I checked in on him a few times, he was in bed fast asleep, and even though it was dark, I couldn't see anyone else in there. I walked over to the other bedroom door, which was closed, and gathered my breath, building the nerve to knock on it. Then I pressed my ear to the door and listened in. I could hear this strange scraping sound, as if they were moving furniture about. I knocked again and said, "Hello, I'm the babysitter. I'm just checking everything's okay." Again, they didn't reply, so I pressed a sweaty hand on the door handle, and biting my lip, I tried it. I can't tell you the relief I felt on finding out it was locked. I knocked one more time, then announced that I was leaving. Then I rushed out of the apartment and the building as quickly as I could. As I stepped outside and breathed in the cold air, I realized just how weird the whole thing had been. It was late, so I went home with the intentions to call the agency first thing in the morning and tell them that they should strike that family from their list. I really didn't want what happened to me happening to someone else too. Only when I woke up, I saw that I already had 3 missed calls and an urgent-sounding voicemail from the agency telling me to call them ASAP. When I got through to the agency, she said she received a complaint about me. This woman had left a message saying that I showed up late, I was rude to her and her kid, I stole sodas and food, I broke into her bedroom, and I refused to leave. She'd actually claimed that she felt fearful for their lives. What? I couldn't believe the blatant lies of this woman who I'd never even met. The most I'd taken from her home was a glass of water, nothing else. The agency believed me, but the woman had insisted I be struck off the list, else she would call the cops. The agency didn't want any trouble, and quite frankly, I was put off babysitting for life, so I ended up quitting anyway. When I think back to that night, it leaves me with the shivers. I don't know why that woman acted the way she did or why she made up lies about me. I'm just glad that the bedroom door had been locked, so I dread to think what I could have come face to face with if it hadn't been. Being a single parent with no family to help me meant I relied on a babysitting agency. It was my friend's birthday, and she was celebrating with a meal and drinks in town, so I called the agency and arranged for a babysitter to come over. They told me they had a girl called Gemma available, and sent me the profile of this dark-haired woman in her early 20s. Gemma showed up on time, and although quiet, she was polite enough and gave me no reason to distrust her. I introduced her to my daughter, who was coloring in the playroom, and they seemed to get on just fine. After telling Gemma to help herself to snacks and call if there was a problem, I left them both coloring and got a taxi into town. Gemma didn't call me when I was out, so I just presumed that everything was fine. My daughter was an easygoing kid, so I didn't expect there to be a problem. I arrived home around midnight to find Gemma sitting on the couch in silence. I asked her if my daughter had been good, and she didn't say anything, just nodded. It was late, and I guess she was probably just tired, so I paid her and asked if she had a lift or wanted me to call her a taxi. She just shook her head and pressed her hands to her jacket pockets, which I noticed were bulky. To be honest, I thought she may have filled them with snacks from my pantry or something. A little rude, but I wasn't going to bring it up at this hour. I showed her out, locked the door behind her, and went and checked on my daughter. Only when I creaked open her bedroom door, I saw that she wasn't in her bed. Frantic, I turned the light on. That's when I saw something crouched in the corner of the room, barely visible beneath a giant stuffed bear. I told her it was just me, but she didn't come out from behind that bear. I had to kneel in front of her and gently try and pry it away, but she clung to its arm. She looked terrified and wouldn't stop shaking. I hugged her and asked her what was wrong. Eventually, she calmed down enough to point over to her toy box. She seemed to want me to look in it, so I did. I lifted the lid and peered down into it, but what I saw made me gasp in shock. Every single one of her dolls was decapitated, the heads sliced clean off. Looking down at that doll massacre was so unsettling. I asked my daughter what happened, but she was trembling too much to answer me. The weirdest part was there was no sign of the heads anywhere. I knew my daughter would never have done something like this. She adored those dolls. I also knew the smooth cuts like that could not have been done with something sharp. I was about to ask her if Gemma did this when I heard a knock at the front door. By this point, although creeped out, I went down there and fastened the chain before I opened the door, enough to see who it was. Gemma was there, expressionless and pressing her hands to her bulky pockets. I tried to sound calm as I asked her what she wanted. In this passive voice, she said, "I need to come inside." I asked her if she'd forgotten something. She shook her head and again demanded that she needed to come inside. I told her it was late, and if she'd forgotten anything, I'd drop it off at the babysitting agency tomorrow. I just wanted her to leave me and my daughter alone. I closed the door on her and checked on my daughter, who I found curled up asleep in my bed cuddling that stuffed bear. Seeing that she was okay, I went back downstairs and poured myself a drink of water to try and calm myself down. That's when I thought about the doll heads and the clean cuts. I went and checked my knife drawer. I counted them several times, but there was no doubting it. One of them was missing. I stayed downstairs to try and make sense of what was happening. Then, about 20 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. I didn't have to answer it to know it was Gemma. A few minutes passed, then I heard another knock. I didn't know what to do. For all I knew, she had a knife on her. So I crept toward the door and croaked out, "Gemma, is that you?" I waited and waited. On hearing no reply, I bravely made myself open the door with the chain still on to see if she was still there. To my relief, she'd gone, but there was something lined up in the front of the door. The porch light flickered on even though I couldn't see anyone about. Then I saw what was lined up on the doormat. My daughter's doll heads, all facing me with their unnerving smiles and wild hair. I immediately closed and locked the door. Then I called the cops and left a message for the agency. I ran upstairs and stayed there cuddling my daughter until the cops showed up. When they arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of Gemma. The next day, when the agency called me back, they apologized for what had happened and said they'd remove her from their list. Whenever I think about leaving my daughter alone with that girl, the guilt festers inside of me. My daughter doesn't like to talk about it, and even seeing a doll is enough to make her fall silent and give this troubled look. I hope with time she'll be okay, I truly do. Thinking back on it, I now know exactly what must have been bulking out the girl's jacket pockets. My daughter's doll heads.